What is going on, guys? Today we have the Week 17 NFL Power Rankings. And let's just jump right into this one. And at number 32, we have the Carolina Panthers. Now, Bryce Young had a pretty decent game this week. Probably his best he's ever had, having 300 yards and 3 touchdowns. But they still fell up short, and you have to remember, if you're a Panthers fan, this is the Packers defense. This isn't a top-of-the-line unit that you're really facing. But definitely a good game from Bryce Young. Number 31, we have the Washington Commanders. Now, this was a bad game from Sam Howell. They end up taking him out for Jacoby Brissett, and they almost complete the comeback. They end up falling short because of Breece Hall only is the reason they lost. But I think Sam Howell should be the starter next year. With a little bit more experience with him, I think he could be a good quarterback in the NFL. Next up, we have the Cardinals. Now, the Cardinals are an interesting team because you kind of want this team to lose if you're a Cardinals fan, so you can get Caleb Williams, Marvin Harrison Jr., or Drake May. And any of those options would be amazing. And it all just really depends on what Chicago does. Next up, we have the Chargers. Now, the Chargers put up a good fight against my Buffalo Bills, but ultimately they lost. They shown lots of trying to prove themselves with the new coach because that coach has no loyalty to any player on that team. So they all want a job come next year. So I think they're going to play very hard for the rest of the year. So a good game from the Chargers, really, but without Justin Herbert, it's kind of hard to go deep in here. Then next up, we'll have the Patriots. Now, I hope I'm not jinxing this for my Buffalo Bills this week, but the Patriots going to Mile High, beat the Broncos, and it kind of hurts them. But if Bill Belichick is going to leave next year, this might be his revenge against Robert Kraft of giving the Patriots a worse draft pick and setting up for the worst future. I don't know. Next up, we have the Giants. The Giants came very close to being the Eagles, and there was a couple of questionable calls that ended up going the Eagles' way towards that end of the game. But it was definitely a close game, and I think the Giants are looking for a quarterback next year. Or do they have their guy in Tommy DeVito? We don't know. Next up, the Tennessee Titans. Now, the Titans are in an interesting scenario. What do? You'll have a higher draft pick. Do you want to go for a quarterback, or do you want to stick with your guy, Will Levis? I think they should stick with Will Levis. I really like Will Levis as a player. I think he will be an elite quarterback in a couple of years. But a very close game against the Seattle Seahawks. And that's really all I have to say about them. Next up, we have the New York Jets. Almost losing on a crazy comeback it would have been. But really what you have to look at, what are you really winning for at this point? Aaron Rodgers isn't coming back. No reason for him to. You're not going to get that higher draft pick, really, at this point in the season. Because you're in that 500 range, but not good enough to make the playoffs. So you're kind of in an interesting scenario if you are the New York Jets. Next up, we have the Bears. This Bears team has been looking a lot better come recent weeks. And honestly, I'm interested to see what the Bears will do next year if they choose to move on from Justin Fields, who's shown lots of improvement in these last couple of weeks, or if you try and get Caleb Williams out of the draft. It's a very interesting scenario where Carolina or the Bears will go with this, but they also have Carolina's pick. Next up, at 23, we have the New Orleans Saints. You look at it on paper, that game looks a lot closer than it really is, and it does not deserve to be a 22-30 game. The Rams blew them out in every aspect of the game. The Saints aren't a good team, but they're still in the race for their division, just because how weak the NFC South is. Next up, we will have the Vikings. Now, the Vikings are in an interesting scenario. They just lost TJ Hawkinson and Jordan Addison in one game against the Lions for the year. And you really have to think, I would just say, if you have Kirk Cousins, this would have been a completely different game in every single way, but you don't have him, so it's kind of weird where you'll be with him. Next up, we have the Falcons. Now, the Falcons are an interesting team. Just blew out the Colts. Arthur Smith trying to keep his job. But really what you have to look at is, can they still win the NFC South with how good Tampa is playing with Baker Mayfield? I don't think they can. So I think it makes more sense just to tank for the rest of the 2 games we have in the NFL season and just try and get a higher draft pick. Next up, we will have the Broncos. The Broncos, you're so close to just finishing and winning your division. Not the division, just making the playoffs. And then you go out and lose to the Patriots in a close game, which should never have been close. I mean, the Patriots want to lose and you guys want to win. Doesn't really make sense how that one turned out. But that's how it did, and I think their season's over. Number 19, the Colts. They just lost to the Falcons. How this is probably going to eliminate them from the playoffs, I could be wrong. But even if you do get into the playoffs, how far are you going to get in the playoffs? Not that far, the answer is. So it doesn't make too much sense, to try and get super far in the playoffs, but not win the Super Bowl because you want that higher draft pick. Next up, we have the Packers. The Packers almost lost to the Panthers, which would have been terrible for their playoff odds. It really could have killed their playoff chances, but it didn't, and it saved them. But with that, they have a good chance to make the playoffs. And next up, we have the Raiders taking down the Chiefs. And what a game on Christmas Eve. The Chiefs hand-wrapped a present for the Raiders, and it was their interim head coach is staying for next year, and he better do it. They should never have hired Josh McDaniels. They should have sticked with that one guy they had when John Gruden was fired. But they didn't. And look what happened. This is just what happened. And next up, we have the Jaguars. The Jaguars are in a great position to get the second seed in the playoffs. And they just come up short, getting crushed by Tampa, who has been electric this year for lots of the year. And next up, we have the Texans. The Texans, when does CJ Stroud come back? That answers if you can make the playoffs. And if he doesn't, I don't think you really have the greatest chances of making the playoffs. So that's really what it comes down to. Next up, we have the Bengals. They just can't finish with Jake Browning. They can't do it. They get blown out by the Steelers, who haven't shown any offense all year. I think it was 30-13. When a team doesn't show offense, you can't allow that. It's just not going to work out in the National Football League. You're not going to win a game by doing that. And that's really all it is. And next up, we have the Steelers, who beat the Bengals. They crushed the Bengals. I kind of came into all topic. I don't think they'll make the playoffs, but they'll be a 500 team because they have Mike Tomlin as the coach. And does he eventually get put on the hot seat? That's an interesting question. And really one that I think about as, yes, if the Steelers don't make the playoffs, I see him on the hot seat. But see him stick around for another year. And next up at number 13, we have, or number 12, I'm sorry, the Seattle Seahawks. You barely squeak out a win against the Tennessee Titans. It's fine. You'll have games like that. But you need to realize there's going to be teams better than Tennessee in the playoffs. And that's what it comes down to. You have great players, but you just need to put everything together and give DK Metcalf the ball this week because I have him in fantasy for the championship. Next up, at 11, Buccaneers. Baker is playing great football. The Browns are saying, why did we let him go to get Deshaun Watson when we could have just started Joe Flacco over him and paid $5 million just to have him sit on the bench instead of paying someone $250 million to sit on the bench. And really, what it comes down to is this team has great players all around. And next up, we have the Rams. The Rams are a good team, just blew out the Saints. I know the score doesn't indicate that, but it was a blowout. Couple of garbage time touchdowns. So, this is your time, Rams. Show the world what you can do. And you got to do it quick because you don't have all the time in the world to do it. Next up, we have the Chiefs. The Chiefs. You're trying to go for that 1 seed? No chance anymore. The 2 seed might be out of range. I mean, this Chiefs team is in an interesting spot. You were hot in the beginning of the year, but you're getting cold in the end of the year. Opposite of what you're supposed to do. I don't know why they want to get hot in the beginning of the year and get cold in the end of the year. Doesn't make sense to me. But I guess Andy Reid's a good coach, so he probably knows what he's doing. Next up, Eagles. Bounce back win against the Giants, but lots of questionable calls that should have been flags and easily could have lost that game. I don't really have that much more to say on this game. I think the Eagles can be a dangerous team, as we all know, in the playoffs. And that's really it on this team. So next up, we have the Cowboys. The Cowboys, you need to beat a good team when they're playing at their best. Football. You didn't beat Buffalo, you didn't beat Miami. You haven't beat a team that has playing great football at their best at that time. You can say the Eagles, but you can't because the Eagles just went on a super cold stretch for that run, and they were obviously not playing their best. Next up, we have the Lions at number 6. Now, you want to go in and make a statement when beat Dallas Cowboys at their place, and you move into my top 4. No questions asked. You move into my top 4 if you beat the Cowboys at home this week. That's really what it comes down to. I think they have great pieces all around the board, and that's what you need in a football team. Now, next up, we have the number 5 Browns. Joe Flacco can throw a football pretty good. And that's what we learned this week. Amari Cooper can catch the football. This Browns defense is dangerous. And that's really all I have to say on them. I mean, a great team performance, a great win, but I don't think Myles Garrett is fully healthy. He hasn't had a sack in a little bit. Makes me wonder, is he at full strength for this playoff run that they are going to have to go on? Next up, number 4, my Buffalo Bills. It was hard. It was not an easy win. It was not a blowout win, but it's a win in the National Football League, and that is all that really matters to the Buffalo Bills, and that's all that it comes down. It will end up having to come down to. It's a win that the Bills needed a lot. And that's really it to it. Next up, we have number 3, the Dolphins. The Dolphins beat the Cowboys. They beat a good team for the first time in like 2 years. Now, it wasn't in Dallas, but the Bills didn't beat them in Dallas. Dallas is a very good team in Dallas. 7-0 in Dallas. Next up, we have number 2, the 49ers. Brock Purdy, not all those interceptions were his fault. A lot of them really weren't his fault. But when you throw 4, you're going to get the blame taken on you. I think 2 of those were his fault. The one of the first drives in the game, red zone, interception, completely his fault. And a lot of them just bounce off his receiver's hands, which is very uncharacteristic of the 49ers. And obviously at number 1, the Baltimore Ravens. Please, please, please beat the Miami Dolphins next week. Please beat the Miami Dolphins next week, because the Bills will have a chance at the division if you do. And the Ravens look complete. Lamar Jackson is playing in MVP form. Everything is going good for the Ravens right now. Amazing defense, amazing quarterback, and great receivers. That's it for this NFL Power Rankings. Tell me what you think on the video. Make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in my next upload.